New Falcons GM Ian Cunningham says he wants to build in the trenches, but will he put his money where his mouth is when it comes to the defensive line?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the universe. And I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And today, we are potentially getting into our final free agency breakdown, where I will be looking at various position groups. Today, we'll be talking about the interior D-line and the edge rushers, right? Talk about how thick the edge group is versus how thin the interior D-line free agent class is. We'll talk about, the decision that the Falcons will potentially have to make on LaCale London, as well as several other impending free agents. But, I think filling out this D-line room is going to be an interesting sort of question this offseason. How aggressive are the Falcons going to be, right? I remember during the summer when people were doing their final roster projections back in August, it was like, they were putting like 13, 14 guys on their defensive lines. And I was like, yeah, you only really need 10 or 11. And if we're doing that math and sort of being like you need 10 or 11 guys, right now the Falcons only have 6 guys on their defensive line technically under contract. And so presumably, we should be expecting them to add 4 to 6 guys this offseason. And the question, of course, is will that come in draft? That will come in free agency, probably some type of split, but how will that split go? Are they just kind of looking for bodies? Will they be aggressive about trying to find upgrades in that spot? We know Ian Cunningham said in his introductory press conference back earlier this offseason that he believes in building in the trenches, and sort of, it's like, put your money where your mouth is, Ian, when it comes to that. But let's get into this edge free agent class to see some of the options that the Falcons will have. And when we were doing the linebacker breakdown earlier this week, we talked about the projection that I had where Kaden Elliss was potentially going to get $12 million a year. And basically, I argued then, instead of taking that $12 million a year on a new contract for Kaden Elliss, you could take that $12 million a year and spend it on an edge rusher as a way to try to compensate for the loss of Kaden Elliss by building up that 4-man pass rush that we're still trying to work on here in Atlanta, that took big strides last year, but still has a ways to go, at least based off of pressure last year. That when they rushed 4, they were closer to league average than at the top of the league, like they were in sacks. So the question is, like, if you're freeing up potentially $12 million to spend on an edge rusher, do you spend all of that money on one guy versus, do you get multiple guys for that same sort of price? And 12 million is where my cutoff is for sort of the top of the market when I'm breaking down these guys. And I have 9 edges that I'm projecting. And again, I'm making educated guesses, and we'll see how educated these are going to be in the next week or so. Very poor education, 3rd grade education, as opposed to, college degree education. We'll find out. But I have 9 edges projected to make the top of the market. Just some of the highlights. For those of you listening on the audio side of things, if you're watching on YouTube, you can sort of see the full breakdown with the graphics on the screen right now. But, I have Trey Hendrickson at the top of it with a contract projected to be just shy of $30 million a year on a 3-year deal. Jalen Phillips, a 4-year deal worth $100 million, so about $25 million a year. Odafe Owe, just shy of $19.5 million, just shy of $20 million a year on his projection. And then guys like Boye Mafe, Khalil Chason, Kwity Paye, all projected in that $14 to $17.5 million a year range. But if I had to pick any one of these 9 guys, right, if we're talking about spending a top of the market deal on any one of these guys, the guy that I would probably choose is the one I have as the cheapest on a 1-year, $14 million deal. That would be Khalil Mack, right? I just feel like Khalil Mack would be a very fun 1-year rental. We've seen the Falcons bring in these veterans on these 1-year deals in the past, like Leonard, Floyd, Bud Dupree, among others, Calais Campbell, and they've been effective for the most part here in Atlanta. Khalil Mack is still a fun player, still an effective pass rusher, may not be getting the sack production, but he can be a big part of your pass rush because of the power that he brings. And I feel like that's something that's missing from this edge room, which we need to get a couple more pocket collapsers in an ideal world, guys that can really beat up offensive lines. And Khalil Mack definitely checks that box. But, if the Falcons don't spend at the top of the market, could they go bargain shopping? And then we get to the mid-tier guys, those guys that I'm projecting to make anywhere between $5 and $12 million. And that includes two impending free agents for the Falcons, Arnold Ebiketie, that I'm projecting signing a 1-year prove-it deal for $8 million, and Leonard Floyd doing the thing that he's done several times over the last couple of years, which is that 1-year mercenary contract. Last year, we got him at $10 million, I think, because of the dip in sack production. Some team will get him on a relative bargain, depending on what you think about Leonard Floyd, at $7.5 million. And I think both of those guys could be very affordable for the Falcons to bring back. I'm certainly open to the Falcons bringing both of those guys. We'll just have to wait and see if Ian Cunningham is open for that. But, I think, going with some mid-tier guys, maybe some low-tier sort of reclamation projects, some guys coming off some injuries, some guys that are in, Joshua Uche, Cam Sample, etc., Azeez Ojulari, some guys that are, got kind of lost in the shuffle this past year, either due to injuries or not getting snaps, maybe taking some low risk, high reward type bets on some of those guys makes a ton of sense. But, I'll be ultimately curious to see how aggressive the Falcons are going to be when it comes to addressing their edge room, right? We know that they need to continue investing in that position, but it's a question of, are they going to be willing to spend money on that position? Or are they going to be willing to spend premium draft capital? Or again, like I said, they're going to be looking more at bodies, right? Now, I think this free agent class is, going to give you plenty of options at edge, right? So you should have an opportunity to address it in March, at least somewhat. Again, maybe you may not solve your problems fully there, but you should be able to bring in a body. But I also thought this like 2 years ago when there was a really deep edge group heading to free agency then, and we watched Terry Fontenot and company basically sit out that free agent period. And then that ultimately forced them to have to, get aggressive at the end of the summer and trade a 3rd-round pick for Matthew Judon, a 3rd-round pick that, certainly could have been useful for the Falcons last year, and could have avoided lots of headaches. But that will be a future breakdown for a future episode, probably later this month or early next month, when things slow down after these first few waves of free agency. But, Ian, if you're out there watching, just avoid that. Just go out there and get a body or two at the very least in March, so that we're not sitting here, trading 3rd-round picks in August to compensate for that. So, we'll see if Ian Cunningham, takes that advice and how aggressive the Falcons will be with some of these edge rushers. Again, there's lots of options out there, but not so much when it comes to D-tackle room, right? And we'll focus on some of the potential nose tackles because that's a potential area of need for the Falcons. And that'll get us to a conversation about LaCale London and how big a priority he will be to be retained as a restricted free agent. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So we live in a world where you can stream anything, order food in minutes, and you carry a supercomputer in your pocket, but somehow buying tickets to a live game still feels complicated. Hidden fees, jumping prices, endless steps. There has to be a better way, and now there is. It's why I use the Game Time app. It gives the advantage back to the fans and makes getting tickets simple, whether we're talking NFL games, concert, comedy, music, theater, whatever you're into, right? You can see the panoramic seat views in the app before you buy, right? The price you see is the price you pay because it includes all fees, no surprises at checkout. And it's just 2 taps and you will have your great seats locked in. It's fast, it's easy, it's done. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. And it is tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is a lot. Trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth and wondering, do they really get your situation? But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. Head to turbotax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment today. So when we talk about the interior defensive line, right, we know that the priority for the Falcons is probably going to be beefing up that run defense, although they won't be as dire a situation if they are able to retain LaCale London. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it is not a great defensive line crop headed to free agency. I've included 5 potential cap cuts. A few of those guys like Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave have already been informed that they're going to be cut. Dalvin Tomlinson is another one. And that pushes the total of D tackles that I've listed on your screens if you're watching on YouTube to 19. And only 3 out of those 19 guys are under the age of 30 going into this upcoming season. And 2 of those 3 are 29, right? And it'll be interesting to see how that the older age of this D-line, interior D-line, D tackle, whatever you want to call it, impacts the spending, right? Because there's maybe not this, there's the high demand, but maybe not quite the supply. But we saw last year with older guys like Grady Jarrett, Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, right? All those guys got deals north of $14 million a year, despite being older free agents hitting the market. And none of those guys really worked out, right? Hargrave and Allen are being cut after 1 year. Grady Jarrett, we love our guy, but did not necessarily play at a high level for the Bears team. And will there be kind of a market correction? Will teams be more reluctant to pay out, premium contracts for some of the older free agents? So one of the guys that I don't think teams will be reluctant paying that I have listed at the top of the market is John Franklin Myers. I have him projected on a contract of 3 years, $54 million. Right. And then Logan Hall is the next guy where I've seen projections where he's projected to only make like $8 million a year from other websites and whatnot. And I'm just like, just because of his unique youth, right? He's going to be 26 going into the season. And the dearth of under 30-year-old competent D tackles, I feel like his price is going to go up. So I have projected at like 3 years, $40 million. And then my third guy is Khyiris Tonga on a 2-year, $24 million projection. And again, that nose tackle market, I think, is going to be fascinating to watch, right? Because I was listening to the Yahoo Sports Football 301 podcast with my guy, Charles McDonald and Nate Tice, and they were talking about how the nose tackle position is undervalued, right? And whether or not you'll see guys like Tonga, Roy Lopez of the Lions, right? Do they get a boost to their free agent markets? Because this is a necessary position, especially in nowadays with the run game being back and teams playing with lighter boxes because of, playing those 2 high safety shells and whatnot and needing more wide bodies up front. We just saw Teair Tart get an extension from the Chargers for $10 million a year. Is this a sign that NFL teams are going to be willing to pay for those nose tackles? And so based off of, I think we are leaning in that direction. I do have Tonga projected on a $12 million a year deal, but it could easily be Roy Lopez, who I have projected on a $7.5 million a year deal. And we know that the Falcons could certainly get a boost to their nose tackle and find answers like Tonga, like Lopez, if they're willing to spend a little bit of money based off my projections in free agency. I've also listed a couple of low-tier guys that have some connections with this coaching staff that are nose tackles, like Andrew Billings from the Bears, obviously, with Ian Cunningham coming from there. Tim Settle in Houston, where he played under Nate Ollie for 1 year before Nate Ollie came to Atlanta back in 2024. But, let's get into that conversation with and about LaCale London, right? Because when we're talking about LaCale London, he's a restricted free agent. And for those that don't know, I'll do my best to explain the broad strokes of restricted free agency. It's a little different than the unrestricted free agent, where you're basically, once we get to next week, you're free to sign with anybody else. Doesn't work for that with restricted free agent. You're free to negotiate a new contract with any other team, but your original team has the right of first refusal, and that is basically they have the ability to match a contract that you sign with another team. And rarely do NFL teams sign guys to offer sheets, is what it's called, for restricted free agents, because basically they're always worried about guys matching. We haven't really had any sort of significant moves in restricted free agency for like basically a decade. It's been like maybe 1 or 2 moves. And every year, like we talk about this on the podcast, and I always look it up and I didn't look it up again, but I always forget, like, when was the last time we had a restricted free agent change teams. But LaCale London is a restricted free agent. There are 3 levels that you can tender a guy. So if you're the original team, you can tender them based off of their original draft position, right? Or a second round tender or a first round tender. Now, because LaCale London and most restricted free agents nowadays are former undrafted free agents, right? Because the way that restricted free agency works is if you have 3 years of experience, you become a restricted free agent. If you have 4 years, you're an unrestricted free agent. But because almost every draft pick signs a 4-year deal, they never get to restricted free agency. So the only guys that really ever get to restricted free agency typically are undrafted free agents. But because they're undrafted, right? And your original pick tender is about $3.52 million. And what that means is if a new team signs you to a contract, the old team, if they tendered you at the original pick level, the right of first refusal level, or whatever you want to call it, they are owed a draft pick, the old team. So they are owed a draft pick based off of where you were originally picked. If you tender a guy at the second round level, which the Cowboys just did for their kicker, Brandon Aubrey, for $5.77 million, you get a second round pick. If you tender a guy at the first round level, which teams rarely do nowadays, that's rarely happening, but I think it's like 7 point something million. I didn't even look it up just because it doesn't usually apply. But then you get a first round pick for that guy, right? But because an undrafted free agent wasn't used a draft pick on that guy, you get no compensation. And so that's always a challenge with these restricted free agents, where it's like, if you think a guy will actually garner attention on the market, you typically tender him at the second round level. But most teams don't do this, right? Because of that right of first refusal, that ability to match. And so I don't think the Falcons have to do that with LaCale London, right? Someone would have signed Brandon Aubrey definitely for $3.5 million. They would have happily, gone out and got him at the kicker level. But that $5.8 million that the Cowboys did, I think was probably going to keep Aubrey safe. But I think the Falcons, all that to say, the Falcons should tender London at the $3.5 million level. That's basically the going rate for a solid sort of nose tackle. Greg Gaines with the Bucs last year, Roy Lopez before he signed with the Lions last year. That's what they signed for, 1 year, $3.5 million deals. So that to me is a good market value for a nose tackle like LaCale London. Now, the question, of course, the Falcons may make the decision of, well, we can get younger, we can get cheaper than that, particularly in the draft. We've already seen them decide not to tender Sam Roberts, their backup nose tackle. And that means that he's going to be an unrestricted free agent because he doesn't get that tender at any level. And so the question, of course, is going to be, what will they do with LaCale London? They'll have to make a decision at some point later this week. Maybe by the time you guys are listening to this, they've already announced that decision. So we'll see. But, LaCale London had 5 sacks last year. That gets a lot of the attention. But I think the thing that really needs to get more attention with LaCale London was he, alongside Kentavious Street, was a big catalyst for the improvement of the Falcons' run defense in the second half of the season. Those last 7 games, we broke this down back in early February when like London and Street were on the field at the same time. Like the Falcons had a top 5 run defense. I can't remember the exact stat I said, but I talked about it in that D-line breakdown back at the beginning of February. So, London, to me, his run defense was a big part of why this Falcons built a competent run defense, and to let him walk for, $3.5 million, because the Falcons don't want to pay $3.5 million, I think would not be a good step in the right direction. But we'll see, right? It's a new regime. Will they be focusing on keeping this D-line group, making Jeff Ulbrich happy and basically keeping this D-line group together? I could definitely see, we talked about 4 to 6 guys they could add. I could definitely see 3 of those guys being LaCale London, Kentavious Street, and Khalid Kareem. And so therefore, all of a sudden, those resolve some of the back end rotational pieces. And then it's really just going to be, can you get another upgrade in here, another veteran guy in free agency at the edge or whatever to replace Leonard Floyd, or to replace Arnold Ebiketie? Do you bring those guys back? Do you wait till the draft? Again, all of these things are unknown, but as we are, probably by the time you're listening to this, about 24 hours before the legal tampering period kicks off on Monday, we're eager to see what exactly the Falcons do. And so that is going to do it for us here, guys. Appreciate you for going through these free agent breakdowns all week long. Try to get you this last minute cram session. I was joking with somebody earlier. It's like, yeah, I'm doing all this work to get you guys geared up for free agency to only watch the Falcons do absolutely nothing in free agency. But that's just how the way it goes, right? I'd rather you guys be prepared and understand what's going on, even if the Falcons aren't doing anything, as opposed to, we got to cram for the test, right? It's just like, you guys are in a position because you listen to this podcast. If I can toot my own horn, you studied for the test and you would ace the test when it comes to breaking down how this free agent class is going to go, and you can impress your friends with like, yeah, I thought this guy was only going to get $17 million a year and instead of the 19 or whatever, and I'm like, what that whole thing. So that's what we try to do here on this podcast, to get you prepped, even if the pop quiz and test doesn't actually come, if you understand the analogy. So we'll be back with Mock Draft Monday for our next episode, and then we'll see what happens with the Falcons for the rest of the week in free agency. And make sure you check out us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as check out the Everydayer Club. There is no offseason, and now through up to March 15th, you can get a free month of the Everydayer Club, where you get an ad-free version of the podcast, premium Discord access, and more. If you use the coupon code free agency with no spaces, go check it out in the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.